Um, I'm a surgeon, epidemiologist, statistician, and an entrepreneur, now the CEO of a small company. You can find me at Osler at uvm.edu, where I'm an emeritus professor. I'd like to begin with a disclaimer. I'm a researcher interested in the problems caused by sitting, but I'm also the CEO of a company that's dedicated to changing the way people sit. So there's a basic conflict of interest here that's unavoidable. And I apologize for it, but it can't be helped. But I do understand the problem. As Richard Feynman said, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself. And unfortunately, you are the easiest person to fool. So I'm in the game, but I want to talk about the game. Well, first, a little bit of housekeeping. No one needs to take any notes unless taking notes helps you. I can send you a copy of an ebook, Sit Better, published in 2021. Send me an email at tosler@uvm.edu, and I can send you a copy of this book. You can also get it on Amazon. So an outline of what I'd like to talk about for the next 20 minutes, and it's simple. We sit a lot, but unfortunately, we're not designed to sit. And as a result, we've created for ourselves a public health emergency. Core atrophy and poor posture is a problem. Back pain is endemic in the population. And sitting disease, a metabolic condition caused by sitting all day, is really an epidemic that has huge implications for public health. And the question that I'd like to address is, can ergonomic insights mitigate the problems caused by modernity? So as a background, we're hunter-gatherers for 3 million years. We didn't have any chairs, but rather we had active rest postures. Our evolutionary comfort zone was walking 5 or 10 miles a day, hunting and gathering, which makes us unique among our evolutionary cousins, chimps, bonobos, orangutans, gorillas. None of these primates need to do more than walk a mile a day, and that's more than enough. They're perfectly healthy, sitting around all day in a zoo. Humans uniquely require exercise to be healthy. And we know this because if we look at the Hadza, which is a hunter-gatherer tribe in Tanzania, are kind of a window on our past. This is a culture that uses fire and stone tools. And interestingly, they now have shoes from China, probably. But the idea is that these people subsist without furniture. And given the chance, they don't sit, they squat. Keeps them off the ground, and but lets them have sort of an active rest posture. We also squatted until about the 1600s, when Europeans switched from squatting to sitting. Then 150 years ago, manufactured chairs became available, and everybody was sitting. And then really 100 years ago, with the advent of office work, we're all sitting. We're now sitting on an average of 11 hours a day, if you add it up between working and email and watching television and eating. That's a lot of sitting, and it's not what we're designed for. So how's that working out for us? Well, there are two problems, back pain and death. How many of us will die of heart disease? 1 in 4, 25% of us. Interestingly, that mortality rate is doubled for those who sit the most. How many of us have or will have back pain? 8 out of 10. 80% of us, 80% of Americans seek help from a public health professional sometime in their life for back pain. Just exactly how big a problem is sitting? Well, here's a terrific study published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, a really good journal in internal medicine, a multivariable look at people based on their survival, looking at how much they sat. And the hazard ratio for those who sat the most is 1.2, which means a 20% increase in mortality. And it's a big effect. Here's a graph that shows the cumulative mortality on the vertical axis, 1 to 10% over 5 years. Those who sat the most in this dotted and dashed line, 10% of them were dead within 5 years. Those who sat the least, 1%. So sitting is an independent risk factor that makes people die sooner. This is a good paper, but it's not a perfect paper because it's not a randomized controlled study. Unfortunately, we can't do a randomized control study because ethical considerations don't let us take a population and force them to sit because, well, we know it's not good for people and it contributes to their mortality. Other epidemiologic studies, here's one looking at 54 different countries, also found that mortality was hugely increased in people who sit the most. Not surprisingly, because sitting is associated with mortality, it shortens lives. But perhaps surprisingly, it shortens lives in those who sit the most by as much as 2 years. Great study from the British Medical Journal, Sedentary Behavior and Life Expectancy in the United States. And they found that 2 years of life years were lost in those who sat the most. Immediately, the question comes up, why is it that this sitting is so bad for people? Well, it's certainly associated with obesity and diabetes and heart disease, and even some cancers, all of which contribute to dying sooner. So that's just epidemiology. To really understand the problem, we want to understand the physiologic mechanisms, the biochemistry that underlies the problem. Unfortunately, that kind of work has also been done. Here's a group that looked at the NHANES data from 2003 to 2006, published in the European Heart Journal. And they found that in people with the most sedentary time, they had increased waist circumference, they were overweight, their HDL cholesterol, their C-reactive protein, their triglycerides, and their insulin all were elevated. All of these are associated with poorer metabolic health and earlier death. It also turns out that sitting affects our vascular system because there's the lining of our cells produces nitric oxide. When you sit around, there's less blood flow and nitric oxide production drops off. And so people are predisposed to vascular disease. And this, from the journal Circulation in 2017, found that the myocardium, the muscle of the heart itself, was injured in a subclinical way. We find the markers that you see in a heart attack at very low levels in people who sit the most, showing that the heart muscular itself is damaged by sitting. So epidemiology shows us the size of the problem, basically 2 life years lost in those who sit the most. And physiology provides a plausible mechanism as to why lives are shortened by sitting. Epidemiologists live for this kind of problem because if we could add 2 life years to everybody in North America, it would be a monumental score for the epidemiologic community. So what possible solutions are there? Hold that thought for a moment, because it's not just about the metabolic consequences of sitting. It's also the case that back pain is an immense problem. 80% of Americans, as I mentioned, seek care for back pain at some point in their lives. This works out to $100 billion a year in economic terms, in terms of missed work, chiropractic visits, surgery gone wrong. The whole thing can become quite expensive. Interestingly, the incidence of back pain hasn't changed despite 100 years of effort by the ergonomists to make chairs that won't have this problem. It's hard to solve a problem that you don't understand. And amazingly, the medical community doesn't understand what back pain is. We don't even know what hurts. And worse, we don't even seem to be curious as a medical community. Here's a terrific paper from the Lancet in 2018, where they point out low back pain is now the leading cause of disability worldwide. For nearly all people with back pain, it is not possible to identify a specific nociceptive cause. That means we don't know what it is that's hurting. And they say, while most episodes of low back pain are short-lasting with little or no consequence, recurrent episodes are common, and low back pain is increasingly understood as a long-lasting condition with a variable course rather than episodes of unrelated occurrences. Which is to say, if you have back pain, it's a lifelong problem that comes and goes, but never goes away. And we don't even understand why. So back pain it's also a problem worth solving because it's immensely expensive. And it gets worse because well-intentioned but perhaps ill-informed healthcare providers turn to opioids, narcotics, as a way to um, ameliorate back pain. But this just can turn a problem into a catastrophe because people who are introduced to narcotics sometimes go on to become addicts and have a fatal outcome. Um, there's also an entire industry that is predicated on operating on people with back pain. But as a famous physician said 100 years ago, there's scarcely any problem so grave that it cannot be made worse by surgery, which is to say, for some back pain, surgery is certainly a solution, but for most back pain, it is not. So the bottom line is we don't really understand what's causing back pain, but our chair-centric culture is likely part of the explanation because in cultures that don't sit, they don't have nearly as much back pain. So what might solutions to our problem with sitting be? Well, most obviously, we could go back to hunting and gathering, but because there are now almost 8 billion of us on Earth, there isn't enough land for that. So we could change how much we sit. We could change how long we sit for, how long our sitting episodes are, or we could change how we sit. Epidemiologists know that it's very difficult to get people to stop sitting because their lives and their jobs require that they sit. And we've also discovered that begging people to sit for shorter periods of time, to get up every half hour and go for just a 2-minute walk, or possibly a 3-minute walk, it's very hard for people to do that because they're engrossed in their job and perhaps their employers don't want them to go for a walk. So one avenue that is open is we could change how we sit. And there's been, and as my mentor in public health at Johns Hopkins explained it to me, the only way to protect the population is to make it impossible for them to do things wrong. So you can't beg people to drive better, but you can put airbags in their cars. You can put seatbelts in their cars. You can have divided highways so that cars don't run into each other head on and create catastrophes. So by redesigning the environment, you can make it safer. And so we have the idea that we might be able to change the built environment for people in offices to make sitting less harmful. And there have been a number of ideas that have been tried. Kneeling chairs, the yoga ball, standing desks, treadmill desks, active chairs, quite an array. Kneeling chairs came on the scene and were first actually marketed as the computer chair because they were designed for people who would be in front of a computer for many hours a day. It seems like a solution because it divides the weight between the ischial tuberosities, the sitting bones on the bottom of your pelvis and your knees, but it pretty much locks people in position so they can't wiggle or squirm, so their circulation is compromised. And the market has spoken. You can find kneeling chairs online, but they aren't seen very commonly anymore. The yoga ball seemed like a great solution because it's part of the yoga exercise community. You find them in basically every gym, but they fail in many ways. They don't actually get people to move more. People just kind of slump into their yoga ball and stop moving just as they would have in any other kind of chair. Standing desks were proposed as a solution and are now a multi-billion-dollar industry. See, they're pitched as though they were a new idea, but they aren't. Ernest Hemingway had a standing desk because he had back pain. Winston Churchill had a standing desk because he had back pain. So standing desks have been around for a long time. Unfortunately, when you get down to measuring what standing desks do to and for people, here's a meta-analysis published in Work. We find that objectively measured prolonged standing postures during desk work do not significantly induce significantly less perceived low back pain compared to seated postures. So standing desks do nothing to get rid of back pain. And more worrisomely, here's a paper that I came out several years ago now out of the American Journal of Epidemiology, a great study that came out of Ontario by Peter Smith and his group. An immensely difficult study to do. They followed people for 12 years. Some of them were sitting and some of them were standing. And they found that people in the standing group had a twofold increase in heart disease compared with people who were sitting. The idea that standing would necessarily be better than sitting because sitting is bad, so standing is the opposite of sitting, so standing must be better, turns out to be entirely misguided. Standing is only the linguistic opposite of sitting. And it turns out, when carefully studied, standing actually increases the rate of heart disease. It's not clear exactly why this is. You can tell by reading the discussion section of this paper that the authors did not expect this. But what seems to happen is when people are standing, their blood cools in their legs and becomes subclinically hypercoagulable and predisposes people to having a heart attack. So standing desks fail spectacularly in that they make people less healthy. Treadmill desks seem like an obvious solution because it gets us back to being a hunter-gatherer, sort of, at least we're walking. And some of them are now rather small. Here's an example that you can find online. Or this is my own personal favorite. If we're going to be gerbils in a gerbil cage, we might as well have a kind of a standing desk that reflects that. Treadmill desks actually fail, however, as well, because they actually make people stupider. They slow down typing. They make mousing rather difficult. And it turns out when you carefully measure things like auditory learning and auditory serial attention, being on a treadmill makes people perform less well. So, and they're kind of irritating for coworkers who might not appreciate the noise and confusion. A final solution that has been proposed is something called active chairs, which are chairs that encourage or even require people to be subtly active while seating because the chair is slightly unstable. It's not yet a well-defined category. There are several different designs. Here are three that you can find online. Nishu chair out of Germany, the core chair out of Canada, the swapper chair out of Germany. And these types of chairs have rather different mechanisms. Here's a spectacularly complicated one that runs the core chair. Here's a rather simple one that runs the core 360 chair. But the basic idea is to make sitting dynamic with moment-to-moment rebalancing of posture. This encourages upright posture, continuous muscular engagement, actually bumps up metabolic rate, and induces continuous motion in most joints, which circulates synovial fluid. How much does active sitting bump up metabolic rate? Well, here's a paper out of ergonomics that shows that when you're sitting on a chair that's slightly unstable, your metabolic rate goes up by about 30%, which is about halfway to walking. Here's somebody, and how do you calculate this stuff? By putting somebody on an unstable chair and then measuring their expired carbon dioxide and their inhaled oxygen, and you can compute what their metabolic activity is. Here's our group at the University of Vermont doing the same kind of work on an unstable chair, measuring the metabolic impact of sitting actively. We know that moving even a little bit is immensely good for people. Here's a great study from the United Kingdom's women's cohort study, where one of the questions they asked in this long-term study was, are you a fidgeter? And it turns out that people who fidget, just that much movement makes them live quite a lot longer. So it doesn't take a lot of movement to make a big difference over time. So active chairs increase the metabolic rate, so are likely helpful in decreasing sitting disease. And there are anecdotal reports that it also helps with back pain. What's the future of sitting? Well, there are new ideas coming along. There are celebrities. This is Justin Bieber hawking some kind of a chair that produces motion in people. And in case you missed it, there was actually a Super Bowl ad pitching the idea of active sitting. it's hard to tell exactly what that ad was for, but it's for getting chairs that get people to move while they're sitting. Big companies are buying up active sitting intellectual property. Knowles, that ad was by a company called Fully. The Knoll company just bought Fully. And then Herman Miller just bought Knowles. So the whole business is kind of being acquired by the big chair industries. So to sum up, we're not designed to sit. So sitting so much causes a lot of mischief. It is bad for our posture, is the source of much of our back pain, and produces metabolic consequences. There's several proposed solutions: the ball, the standing desk, the treadmill, active sitting. In my opinion, I think active sitting is going to be the front runner in the long haul, but the marketplace is still making up its mind. So sitting has changed a lot over time, from the Hadza and our hunter-gatherer ancestors squatting. The Egyptians developed chairs, the Chinese developed chairs, and now the chair's still evolving. Now we're developing chairs that let people move while they're sitting. And the question is, what direction will chairs develop in? Will they become ever more comfortable? Here's a screenshot from Wall-E where people move less and less until they can't move at all. And there are companies actively pursuing this idea where your desk is more like a bed, or your chair is more like a Segway, or Toyota is even in the act with kind of an active chair that'll take you from place to place. Or another idea would be to make a chair that lets people move while they're sitting, and requires them to move just to stay balanced and upright. And so it's a way to get more metabolic activity and more movement into a day without getting up from your desk. So I'd be open to questions and thoughts, and especially predictions about how you might think this is all going to develop going forward. There are bicycle, I'm answering MD here, Matt Drablik. There are seats that chairs you can buy now that have pedals underneath that you can pedal, but they're rather intrusive. And if you watch people, they don't spend much time pedaling them. It seems like an obvious solution, but it requires people to do something, which as an epidemiologist, we know is not a winning proposition. You need to build activity into people's day that's non-negotiable. If you have a bicycle under your desk, you might or you might not pedal it. If you taking the stairs is a good resolution, but you might or you might not take the stairs. My idea is that if you put people on a chair that requires them to have muscular engagement, not to fall off, is really a way to get people engaged, both muscularly and mentally. Do I have any recommendations? Well, I think just considering how much you move while you're sitting is the place to start, and then look for a way to move more. And if you have control of your environment, you can get up every half hour and go for a 3-minute walk. Makes a big difference in your serum glucose levels. Actually, there's a couple of spots on National Public Radio about a group at Columbia that's exploring that. So getting up often, every half hour, is an immensely helpful thing to do for yourself. So sitting for shorter periods of time. But if you find yourself unable to do that, a chair that is unstable and keeps people moving may be a better solution. So names of active chairs, there's the Mishu, M-I-S-H-U, from a group in Germany. It's terrific. It's all wood. Even the rocking mechanism is made out of wood. It's a very elegant it's a very elegant piece of machinery. The core chair out of Canada is more kind of office grade, and we make one here in the United States, QOR 360 or 360, which is a company that I'm the CEO of. Apologies for the pitch, but these are the three, and also Swapper, another SWOPPER in Germany. You know, I can't give you the name of the study in Colombia, but if you just look at sitting disease and NPR with Google, you'll find it immediately. Um, um, Apps to keep you moving while you're sitting is such a great idea. We had the idea that we could use your chair. I'm sitting on one of our tippy chairs now as a cursor control for your computer. So you could the app would be that you use your chair to control the cursor on your computer, or maybe as a game controller to control your luge going down a mountainside or a hang glider or something. So we have the idea to kind of make sitting more fun by turning it into a game controller. More to come on that soon. I agree. The wall is really a terrific. Actually, wall sits are not talked about nearly enough. They are an immense boost for your metabolic health and take minutes a day. I think we're almost out of time. Let's see. Any other questions I've missed? Standing balance boards, yes. If you are a devotee of standing desks, standing on a balance board is a terrific solution. You don't have to do it all the time, just do it some of the time. And there's a company in Canada called MoveMate, MOVEMATE. It makes a terrific kind of standing balance board that's articulated, so your feet kind of have a range of motion built in as well. I think the MoveMate guys make a terrific thing. It's great. MOVEMATE. If you're if you're if you have a standing desk that you like. Yeah, yeah, no. And medium day has got us all sitting here for hours at a stretch. It's but perhaps I was on the one hand, this is exactly the wrong place for me to be talking, and on the other hand, I think it's exactly the right place for me to be talking to because well, all of us sit way more than we were meant to, and so just bringing attention to that fact, I think, can be quite helpful. Um, No, and it turns we have people who say, I used to need a espresso in the morning and espresso mid-afternoon to stay awake. But once I started sitting on a tippy chair, an active chair, I don't need espresso twice a day. So it hasn't been studied, but there are reasons to think that there are mental benefits to sitting actively as well. Well, I think we're over time, and I want to thank everybody for hanging around as long as you have. Um, yeah, no, changing positions your best position is your next position. Unfortunately, most chairs are with a backrest, a headrest, a lumbar support, and armrest pretty much make it impossible to move to any new position. They predetermined the position that they think you should be in. And unfortunately, it's not an optimal position. The ability to move around while you're sitting is hugely important. This is sort of the advantage of a standing desk if you are in fact moving while you're standing. A lot of people will lock a hip and then lean on the desk and pretty much stop moving as though they were sitting, which is why balance board under your standing desk or one of these cool things from MoveMate can kind of really spice up your life if you have a standing desk. Or switching from standing to sitting, also a terrific approach. Just merely the business of doing something different every half hour or hour can make an immense contribution to overall health. We only get one life each, but we have to live it with incomplete information. So I, you know, I recommend that you get as much movement into your life as you can. And if you can bring it to your office, that would be great. Okay, we really are over time. So thank you, everybody. And signing off, Turner Osler. Bye-bye.